the city of St. Louis, you're listening to the Don't Push Pause podcast with your hosts, Justin Johnson and Lindsay Reber.
Hello and welcome to the podcast.
We're back.
We are back. Today's episode, so we haven't, I feel like this is a sort of a delayed tribute, but can there really be a delayed tribute to somebody? I don't know. But today's podcast is a tribute to director Tobe Hooper. And I've kind of we talked about doing this movie earlier in the podcast.
Yeah. But
kind of what got me thinking about doing this movie was it back in March? During the Academy Awards.
Mm-hmm.
Tobe Hooper didn't get his shout out during the awards memoriam.
Seems like a glaring omission.
And I think that, some people might say, well, why does that matter? But it does. It matters.
I mean, if you're making a tribute.
You're doing a tribute, and I know that they, I'm not going to bash the awards, but you couldn't have cut out like a joke or two so that you could flash his picture up there.
Just the
for
picture.
Making a landmark film in cinema history. But that film is what we'll be talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the 1974, really like genre changing.
Yeah, started a lot of tropes for horror movies.
The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
Written by Kim Henkel and co-written by Tobe Hooper and directed by Tobe Hooper.
Mm-hmm.
And God,
edited? Did he edit it too?
I think he co-edited.
Yeah.
And just I'll just say, maybe one of the best titles to a film. It just so has this ominous, powerful title.
So, it took me a really long time actually to watch this movie because just by the title, I thought it was going to be so bloody, and I just felt like, I'm not going to be into that.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of those. I remember I would see it at the video store and just like I would like kind of like look at the box and look at the back and be like, I'm not quite ready for this, and stick it back on the shelf. Like it wasn't something I was ready to jump into.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a movie that I've been able to really appreciate over the years, and it's something I think this is one of those. I watch a lot of horror movies during the month of October, but this to me is such a summer. It's such a hot feeling summer type movie. So I usually
very much so
in the heat of the summers when I want to watch it. So I think it's appropriate that we're doing it.
So you can really feel and get into it.
Yeah.
Not drink water while you're watching it. Just feel disgusting.
So today we'll talk a little bit about Tobe Hooper, his career, but mainly we'll focus on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for our main topic of discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And then as always, we'll have our pick of the weeks. And this week I chose another Tobe Hooper film.
So glad you did this one.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. And yours was?
I did stray from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I did stay within the whole kind of cannibalism venue with a movie from 1993 called My Boyfriend's Back.
Oh, okay.
Completely different.
That is completely different
from what we're talking about today.
It is completely different, but in a good way, I think.
Yeah, liven it up. Not liven it up, but maybe bring up
opposites attract.
Yeah.
And then, as always, we close out with our MurrayMoment.
Mm-hmm.
So, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't really think this needs too much introduction. This movie is now over 40 years old. And I think it still stands the test of time. Say what you will about it being dated or maybe the effects being raw or whatever, but I actually think this movie, to me, has a very almost like a voyeuristic, chilling documentary. I mean, it feels realistic to me.
I think that's the reason why it works and why, in some ways, it's always going to be timeless. Like, you can say that it is dated because they're wearing hot pants or, whatever, by clothes and hair. But otherwise, the movie itself feels very disturbingly real and like you could just be transported into that like it was tomorrow. Yeah.
And I feel like in this podcast, we're probably usually we focus on like one or two topics, but I think there's going to be like a a smattering of little things. There's just so many little things to talk about with this movie, so we might kind of drift around the map a little bit for our discussion on Chainsaw.
It's a fun movie to talk about.
So we'll get into our discussion. We'll go to a fun clip, but before we do that, I think this is the oldest movie we've done so far.
Yeah, hitting that 70s.
But I would never want to go to our first clip without hearing one of your summaries.
Sure.
To the movie we're doing.
Well, it's a story that we've seen so many times in contemporary horror movies. Except this is but this is where the story originated, through this vision of Hooper and Hinkle. So basically, while on a road trip, 2 siblings and 3 friends stumble across a psychopathic, cannibalistic family out in the middle of nowhere in Texas. I think it's important to not discount this movie based on the title and think kind of like how we did, that it was too much based on the title or even the movie cover. And we'll talk more about this, but there is more to it than just what you would think of it, like being bloody and violent and of no substance. There's a lot more going on in this one.
Yeah, we'll get into this.
Yeah.
To me,
I'm already trying to ruin it, aren't I?
No, not at all. To me, this is I consider this. I mean, there's a handful of like what I would consider to be like a landmark horror genre films, and this most certainly I think fits into for the 70s. The Exorcist and Halloween to me like wrap up that entire decade of like these effective horror films. Like
Wes Craven's Last House on the Left, right? That was
yes, that's
very much a landmark movie.
Yeah,
it was also incredibly violent and bloody. It's a great movie. Don't get me wrong. It's just Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of flipped it a little bit and made it to where it's just as terrifying and just as like violating of a feel.
Yeah, but maybe more well crafted. Yeah. And more well developed.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll get into to quite a few things here. So
we're gonna go to a clip now.
We'll go to a clip. I'm probably gonna pick a clip with Franklin in it.
Oh God, Franklin. Ugh.
Somebody's gotta love him.
Should we pick him up?
Oh yeah, man, pick him up.
Well, I think we just picked up Dracula.
Where you headed, man?
South. You work at that place? Oh, no.
How did you get stuck way out here?
I was at the slaughterhouse.
The old way. With a sledge. See, that was better. They died better that way.
How come? I thought the gun was better.
Oh, no. With the new way, people put out a job. I was the killer.
Hey.
Let me see him.
They don't send the heads away.
You took these, huh?
Yeah.
Franklin.
So, Tobe Hooper. I wanted to talk a little bit about him first before we get into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. One of those filmmakers that really was on the fringe of Hollywood through most of his career.
Yeah, even after Chainsaw, yeah.
Yeah, he did a couple of, like Chainsaw was a hit, and he's from Texas, I believe, and had made one feature film before Eggshells before Chainsaw, and then wanted to do something that would turn a profit, so he wrote with Kim Henkel the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and got mainly a bunch of post-grad film students to work on it.
College kids.
Sort of was his calling card for Hollywood. And then did Eaten Alive, which is a film that sort of plays on some of the same topics, and maybe not as successfully, I believe, but kind of based on true crime movie.
Yeah.
And but had a hit with Poltergeist, which I know that I don't really want to get into the whole controversy between Spielberg and Tobe Hooper on Poltergeist, but after Poltergeist, he did a 3-picture deal with Cannon Films, the notorious Cannon Films, and did Life Force, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and before that, Invaders from Mars, the remake.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And
forgot that.
really after that, he kind of was on the outside of Hollywood. I mean, still putting out material here and there, mainly in the horror genre.
Mm-hmm.
But I do, and really I mean, to me, I think like making films is a very hard, I mean, if you can make one excellent film in your entire career, that's a feat. I know there's some directors out there that have made, made a handful, but I think this Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the best thing that he ever did. I do think that there's elements of other films that he did that I do appreciate, and that he tried different things. So, I mean, I think certainly it's a career to be celebrated, but I think this film, it was just, he came out of the gate just hot. It was just, you can't really, this was a hard one to top.
I think in a lot of ways for me, I look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre as, I don't know if this is crazy or not to think, but I mean, it is, I don't want to say it's an art film, but there's a lot of heart and a lot of thought and care that's put into this, but it doesn't look like it's overly produced. It's just, it feels very instinctual. It feels just like he knew what vision he had. And I think also combined with like art direction too, especially for this movie in particular, it just felt like there was a vision that was very clear, and he knew how to execute it.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about the artistry of it, because I do think that the horror genre has always been something that filmmakers have approached as a way to, it's a very marketable genre.
It is.
And it's and it's usually generally movies that can be made for relatively low budget, but they have a rabid fan base. And so unfortunately, I think a lot of times, especially in Hollywood, that fan base is taken advantage of by sort of just kind of cranking out,
especially
a
nowadays
artfully made film. But this one, I think there was the intention of certainly making a genre film, like a horror film, to something that would turn a profit, but there was an artistry and a craft involved. And I think that's why this movie still holds up. I think that's why you can put this movie next to something that comes out in 2018 and still be terrified by it.
Yeah, I mean, nothing like it existed at the time. Not really, but it has since been copied countless times. Whether it's the plot, the types of things that happen in the movie, it's been copied. I can't even begin to count. Yeah. And
this is we're both fans of true crime, and this is I know we were talking a little bit about the genesis of the character was based off of Ed Gein.
Oh, Ed Gein.
Which is also was it Psycho and also Silence of the Lambs a little bit. To me, there is something, I mean, just about any movie now can say it's based off something, a true story.
Sure.
But I think at the time, this movie came out, especially with the opening scroll, with the narration, it just felt like this definitive, like this happened, what you're about to see, what you're about to witness.
I mean, in essence saying that, yeah.
And I think that to me, it's not, this is one of the few films I think like borrowed from true crime without being exploitive and without being too like on the nose, I guess.
Yeah. Like there's nothing in this that directly screams Ed Gein. Like Leatherface is not supposed to be Ed Gein at all. But we take things like some real sick and twisted things that Ed Gein did, and there are elements that are used in the movie, and it is done, I hate even saying it, but it's done beautifully, with, everything from a bed frame made out of bones or a lampshade made out of skin.
Yeah, this is one of those movies I think I really didn't notice or appreciate the art direction and how much just the house in which the family lives, and like the lampshades made of skin and chairs made out of the bones. Now when I watch it, it's ultra terrifying. That's kind of more of the things I focus on, because wow, there's like so much little detail in this film for such a small budgeted movie.
For me, this movie isn't really what I find most terrifying is not actually, we call this being desensitized or whatever, but it's not actually like the killings that happen in the movie. It is very much so the surroundings that this sick and twisted family lives in, and how they interact with each other. And I can't imagine that, Tobe Hooper had everything to do with that.
Yeah, I think this really is a movie that, because the last 20 minutes, it just really focuses on this sort of like crazy, dysfunctional, insane family.
That dinner scene.
Yeah, the dinner scene to me is, it's strange. This is one of those movies that so there's a few films that I would say I appreciate, but they're very unpleasant watches, like I'd put
Happiness,
Happiness or Death Wish or Pieces,
another chainsaw,
or like I'm trying to think of another one, but to me this movie it toes that line. I mean, the last 20 minutes of this film is pretty unpleasant. I mean, it's meant to be kind of torturous for the audience.
There's no blood in it, right?
But I do. Not much, no. But
I love throwing that in about this movie.
Yeah.
Sorry, I love that there's hardly any blood in this movie.
You think that you see a lot, but I do think that the movie itself plays pretty. The characters are rich enough. There's enough motivation. There's enough going on. That to me is like the enjoyable part. Like the introduction of the hitchhiker. Is bizarre, and like Franklin's characters.
Strange.
I mean, there's a lot of things to me that I find enjoyable that make the last 20 minutes not as hard to take in.
Yeah.
But I do think that because we have this transition from date, and that's the other thing too, which I think makes this movie interesting, is like we have a film that a lot of it's focused during the daytime, which with horror films, that's generally not the case. I mean, we go to night because it's scarier, and there's already a lot of people have a fear of the dark, and this movie we're kind of a lot of the...
We go through day and night and morning.
Yeah. And this is a film, if you haven't seen it, but you've seen all the movies that it's influenced, it might not play the same as it does to someone who saw this movie growing up. But I do think that I would just hope to think that, like, someone watching this fresh, even right now, like this year for the first time, would kind of get something out of it.
It's one that every time I watch it, I feel I don't really like to watch it by myself. I think I recall you saying the same thing too. It just makes me feel icky and just disturbed, and not necessarily like I feel like my house is going to be invaded, like other films like where you were like, oh, I feel weird, I'm going to set the alarm now. It's not necessarily that. It's just like it leaves you just feeling gross, and I feel like that's because it feels like it could actually happen.
Yeah, and I think that it does really do really well. Like, I lived in Texas for, 6-7 years, and drove, when I lived there, I lived in Austin for 6 years, but went all over Texas on trips and other stuff. And I just remember, like, driving through West Texas and having this sort of fear. It's hot. It's, the middle of the summer, just like it's so intense, and you're just like, man, if my car breaks down, just the heat alone could probably... there's not a gas station for 25 miles. The heat alone itself could probably kill me. And I think that they really captured the sort of the heat, the desperation of like being in a rural Texas area. And I mean, there's rural places all over the United States, but I really felt like this movie captured that sense of dread of like this oppressive heat and the oppressive summer and like the conditions. And being in a place where they may not get gas, and this guy who's desperate may just take you for all you're worth.
It's
I think
very
it taps
isolating.
it taps into the traveler's fears. And I think that was something that was big in the 70s, because now, everything's easy. We have GPS, we have all this stuff, but I mean, it was a different game if you were going to go on a trip in the 70s. You got your map, you've got some
you were
water,
doing it by car,
and there weren't. You couldn't Google like, what should I prepare for if I'm going across, if I'm going to drive for 11 hours, it's like, here's 80 articles on your checklist for things you should take on your travels. Make sure you have a sleeping bag, make sure you have water. It's just like, but in the 70s, you're probably like three hours in, you're just like, man, I'm real thirsty. I didn't pack any damn water.
2 hours to the next gas station.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just
no one breathe.
I feel like it tapped into a lot of those just like sort of like, just not naive mistakes that you can make, in your early, late teens, early 20s.
It's a very isolating feeling that this movie communicates, and I think you're completely right in that it taps into the fear of being stranded, being alone, being separated, just like not being prepared.
The naive 20-something horror genre.
Oh,
so there's never
this is where it started.
Yeah, there's never a horror movie that stars a bunch of sensible late 30-year-olds. Like, well, actually, I don't know if it's a good idea if we go into this house.
You know what? I'm gonna actually stop you right there. I'm gonna go home now.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna proceed further.
You guys are driving where? So
nope, not doing that. It seems like a terrible idea.
Well, let's go to a more terrifying clip from this film. We'll go to the evening, and I'll find a clip from this crazy when things are about to get crazy in this film.
The dinner scene?
I don't know. I might just play some sounds of chainsaws.
Oh man,
or screaming,
or that Polaroid noise.
Yeah.
Good God.
And then we'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about Chainsaw, and then we'll a little bit more about Tobe Hooper, and then we'll give you our picks of the week.
You're crazy! You gotta make us stop! Please!
You nothing. He's just a cook.
Shut up, you bitch hog.
You Leatherface do all the work. He don't like it, ain't that right? You're just a cook.
Shut your mouth. You don't understand nothing.
I understand you ain't nothing. Me and him do all the work.
I just can't take no pleasure in killing. There's just some things you gotta do.
Just the last 20 minutes of this movie, the audio, like the straight screaming, just stresses me out.
I know.
Stressful.
I've had it playing in my house before, and I've been maybe doing other things in the house, and it'll just dawn on me when I hear the screaming, like, Jesus Christ.
I always have this moment where I feel like I need to turn it down, like my neighbors are just
totally.
like, what is happening over there? Like,
what is going on?
It's like they call the police. It's like, oh, sorry, I was watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre and I had it turned up. It's very intense.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of intense, is just this is one of those movies I feel like the making of the movie is just as interesting as the movie itself. And we're not going to get too deep into it because there's just so much to talk about. But I know they shot this during like a very limited budget during the grueling summer in Texas, which, they shot a lot of this during the day.
And you can
no
feel
air condition, blacked out windows, and
you can feel the heat.
Most of the bones in this were real animal bones. Yeah. Which is, and then I know that there was
one of the actors got, because she knew, or she was working for a veterinarian at the time. And I don't know what their process was of disposal of animals, but somehow she was able to get her hands on some bones.
Yeah, when they actually had like real dead dogs and all kinds of stuff that they were said that during the filming, people were like just like would
There's a lot of barfing.
Run outside to throw up. It's like sounds pretty grueling conditions, but I remember there was an interview with Daniel Pearl, the cinematographer, and he said when he first went out to Los Angeles after this film, after shooting this film, he said he got all these meetings, and he's like, oh great, I got a meeting, but then he would show up and they'd be like, oh, we just wanted to know this notorious making of story of the movie. People were just interested about hearing the conditions, because I guess, you know,
word had gotten out.
It was very grueling for, you know, even for a indie film.
Yeah, I mean, that's not to say, like, movies generally, like, they are not easy, and they are generally grueling, long days of filming. This one, though, in particular, just the weather conditions, and that they were trying to cram as much into the time that they had as much as possible. There are so many scenes where the sun is completely blown out. It really adds to just this feeling of grossness, hot, sweaty. You were just uncomfortable, like, the whole movie. And I think that where the movie's communicating that is what all of the actors were experiencing too, and including, like, I mean, there are countless instances that we know of where, you know, like you already said, people were walking off and vomiting, whether it was like a rotting, you know, corpse that was decaying even faster, not corpse, but I mean, yes, a carcass decaying even faster because of how hot it was.
Yeah.
Or like one of the actors' faces was, you know, like smashed on he said the pavement, and he was made to lay there for the longest time in order to get the shot right because there was a cloud in the way, and he was like, my face is literally cooking on the road right now. So, I mean, the uncomfortableness that you feel in the movie completely existed for those actors.
Yeah, I know in an interview, I know Gunnar Hansen, who portrayed Leatherface, said that they were afraid to wash. He only had one outfit.
Yeah.
So they were afraid to wash his outfit and worried that it would get messed up or anything. So he wore the same clothes 16 hours a day for 30 days, like sweating profusely.
The stench added
to it. He said that people like didn't want to eat by him during lunch break, which I can imagine.
I mean, you know, you can't take that personally, bro.
But the film does. I do think that even though that it was grueling, it adds this sort of element. The heat and the sweat becomes like this character in the film.
Yeah.
It looks real to me. I mean, the actors look uncomfortable.
Yeah, there were no spray bottles being used in this. It is all completely legit.
People look like legitimately uncomfortable on film. So before we go to our pick of the week, I just wanted to touch on a few final things here on Chainsaw Massacre. And in terms of just this being, again, like we said, like a landmark horror film, number one being that this is one of the few films that, you know, it sparked this sort of, you know, there's a killer going around killing teens. But this one was one of the first. I mean, I know you mentioned Last House on the Left, and of course there was Psycho, but this one, the first one that had like an iconic horror like character, like Leatherface became this sort of just cultural horror icon. And, you know, later on we had Michael Myers and Freddy and Jason and Pinhead and all these other, you know, and so on and so on. But landmark in a way that it was like one of the first to introduce a character that would go down in infamy as like, when you think about the movie, you're like, oh, Leatherface, of course, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, in the million movies, versions of this that followed. And this was also you were mentioning I guess like you would call it the final girl.
I mean, I think with this, it's like what you're saying, like this is the first where something like that, where you think of Texas Chainsaw and you think of Leatherface, how it started that in a lot of ways. And it also started the horror movie trope, which I love, is like the final girl, like the lone survivor, the one that makes it out, who definitely is going to need years and years of lifelong therapy afterwards, but they are the one that survives this terrible ordeal. And one of my favorite scenes in this whole movie is the last scene where we see, oh God, I'm blanking on her name. Sally, where she is completely hysterical, covered in blood, and just losing her mind, laughing out of horror that she's escaped while she's watching Leatherface just dance with a chainsaw in the distance as she's being taken away in the back of a pickup truck.
Yeah, I love the ending of this. I think that's something too that sort of shouldn't go unmentioned. Is that it's a great ending because I don't think, number one, I don't really feel it's open ended, and number two, I feel like later on in horror films and the horror genre, if you're setting out to make a horror film, like the ending, you'd always want to put a hook in there for like a sequel, just because there was the assumption.
Yeah.
So there'd usually be some sort of like ridiculous,
Something.
epilogue ending. But this one really ended with a bang.
It's awesome.
It's just
It was
such
a great
an
ending.
incredible ending. Incredible opening. Really, this movie, it really takes the cake for like the title, the opening, the ending. I mean, it has these very powerful images. It's a powerful film.
And even with like setting the stage for further horror movie tropes, it's also like the hick family that you don't know anything about. There's no backstory to set us up for this, and that's something that I really like about earlier horror movies is we don't have any backstory. The same thing with Psycho. Like, we have a little bit. We know he had some issues with his mom. We don't really know what. But that's what makes it even scarier.
Yeah.
And I love that aspect when it's well done and it's not just like rando person just like killing people. When it's something that you're like, you can see through that 20-minute dinner scene that there is a lot of messed up stuff going on within that family.
Yeah.
Like you were learning about that family while you're watching it, and it's almost like I don't need backstory because I'm getting it all right now.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's like I don't need an origin story.
Yeah.
And I also think you make a good point about just this sort of like hick aspect, because we both spent a good amount of time living in the country, and
this was before Deliverance, right?
this was post Deliverance, I believe.
71. I think Deliverance was like 71.
But I think this movie, it plays on that idea of like, these rural areas and rural people, but it doesn't get into all this like, oh, you from the city? This kind of just like ridiculousness that other movies definitely like played into, which became like this sort of like dubbed like Hicksploitation kind of thing. But there's a certain like authenticity to this. I feel like these people live in this rural area, but they don't play up like accents or any goofiness.
No, the actors, I feel like that are the villains or whatever you want to call them in this movie, it feels like they have just been plucked from real world small town. It feels very legit in what they're trying to portray, for sure.
Well, overall, this is a great film. This is one I enjoy. I watch every summer. If you haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a while, I encourage you in the heat of the summer to give it a look. We should move on to our pick of the week.
Yeah.
But again, Tobe Hooper, rest in peace. Thank you for delivering such a wonderful, bizarrely
kind of beautiful movie.
Yeah.
And that inspired countless films after it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're about to go to our pick of the week here, but when you do a podcast, sometimes things happen. Life happens.
Life happens.
My dog cries incessantly sometimes when we try to do our podcast.
That's sweetheart.
Right now I have a bunch of in-laws staying with me, and that's fine with me. I love my in-laws.
They're very
The
nice.
only reason I mention this is because they're upstairs right now having a good time. We're down here podcasting, and that's okay. But if you hear what sounds like a small party going on during our pick of the weeks, that's them just getting back from dinner.
It's completely fine. There's a party upstairs.
All right, so
It's time to get to the pick of the week.
let's
isn't
get
it?
into the pick of the week. Lindsay Reber, what's your pick of the week?
So the movie's called My Boyfriend's Back. I'm going a little off the rails here. All this kind of cannibalism talk, and I can't help but think of zombies. And I'm pretty fond of that genre. It is directed by actor-director Bob Balaban, who you might know from Waiting for Guffman, Best in Show, other Christopher Guest comedies. But, okay. Why love this cheesy zombie love story about a high school kid who returns from the dead just so he can take the love of his life to prom? What's the point? Well, for me, it's just because this movie is so simple and so darn sweet. This film doesn't take itself seriously at all. It's very tongue-in-cheek, black comedy. It's a black comedy about forbidden love. It is strange in that no one in this small town is particularly alarmed by someone returning from the dead, let's say, but they're more bothered by him attempting to court a girl who's alive. We don't take kindly to dead kids around here is something that is very commonly said in this movie, or something like that. His friends, teachers, parents, no one really seems to care that he's back from the dead. Just further adding that this is definitely a comedy and nothing to be taken seriously at all. So there are also plenty of not so hidden metaphors buried in this one. If you were to insert like racial or sexuality subtext here, it would certainly not be off base at all. It's not heavily masked in this movie. Yes, the premise for this one is completely off the wall. Yes, it is completely unbelievable. It's a relic from the 90s that goes for like absurdist humor, finds laughs in like the most morbid of moments, like body parts decaying, off our beloved zombie hero named Johnny Dingle. Like, why did they name him Johnny Dingle? Like, that name. Come on, man. I can't even... Every time they say Johnny Dingle, I'm just like, why is your last name Dingle, dude? Come on.
Dingle's a funny name.
Why are you gonna do it? Out of every name. There are very funny moments. Like, he's coming back from the dead and arguing with his love, being like, I ate someone for you. I did this for you. Like, it's ridiculous, but it is very sweet at the same time. All in all, this movie is something that is kind of nostalgic a little bit for me. I can't really think of another movie like it, nor do I ever think that it should be attempted again or recreated. Not that I think anyone would ever attempt it, but it definitely shouldn't be. It's not rocket science, but it doesn't mean that there's not some depth in this one. Every time I see our little Johnny Dingle get to take the love of his life to prom right before his body collapses in front of her on the dance floor, I'm totally in tears. I mean, not gushing tears, but I tear up. So it's cheesy. It's so typical romantic comedy. But I guarantee you've never seen anything like it. Totally not ashamed to say that My Boyfriend's Back tugs at my heart real hard. But I'll also take any type of black humor mixed with a love story anytime. It's also worth noting that along with our very accomplished Bob Balaban, who we mentioned before, and the cast isn't really anything to sneeze at either. We've got Cloris Leachman, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Mary Beth Hurt, and then some not cameos, but Matthew Fox of Party of Five, if you remember that show, and also Matthew McConaughey in bit roles in this movie too.
Wow, I didn't know that those guys were in this.
I know, just like little things. And like Philip Seymour Hoffman has a fairly, prominent supporting role in it. It's pretty ridiculous, but he's
YouTubing that after this podcast.
You definitely should. He plays a little Hoosier. It's real cute. And even though our main stars, Andrew Lowry and Tracy Lind, had very limited careers, to me, they'll forever be the sweetest couple who totally embodies undying love. That's just me. I think this movie's real sweet. It's real stupid. What about your pick of the week? I'm kind of excited about this.
So they're really getting excited up there.
I know. I think My Boyfriend's Back really jazzed them up. So
my pick of the week I picked Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, which this one was written and directed by Tobe Hooper. It's strange because it kind of picks up, so it doesn't really pick up where Texas Chainsaw Massacre left off. It's like there's this gap of time that happens between Texas Chainsaw, but immediately I think that there was black humor that was intended in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and that didn't play to audiences. And so Tobe Hooper was like, I'm really making it evident in Part 2. And so this came out in 1986, I believe. We really get he's showing this sort of idea of like yuppies became a thing in the 80s, and the introduction is like very non-rural. It's like these yuppies driving in like a BMW or something, and the leather, it's very, very violent. Like this movie to me is like overly violent. Like they tried to go as over the top as they possibly could, to the point. I mean, it's almost disgusting. It's almost disgusting. I don't know. The thing is, it's like this movie is worth watching because of the insanity of it. It's like it's one of those movies you look back and you're just like, man, it's nuts that this movie got made. Mm-hmm. Because it is very much like a retelling of the first film, but they add like a marshal that's after them. Dennis Hopper plays, and also he like is a chainsaw wielding, that goes out and gets some chainsaws. There's just so many crazy things about it, but we do have the Leatherface character. We do have the cook, and we get a little bit more backstory on how they're surviving. That they're making sausages now out of human body parts. Award-winning chili.
Yeah.
They're award-winning chili. But it is a movie. It's kind of one of those things that just has to be seen to believed. I will say this with one thing. There's a character in it that has a metal plate in his head, and I honestly believe that Michael Keaton ripped off his character for Beetlejuice. I honestly believe that he's channeling that character that he portrayed in Beetlejuice. And if you watch the scene where they're in the radio station, I feel like if you just closed your eyes, you would hear Beetlejuice talking. And again, with Tobe Hooper, I do think this is, for me, like I was kind of looking through I wanted to do another Tobe Hooper film for Pick of the Week, and a lot of his later stuff, honestly, I'll be honest. I mean, I'm going to be honest here. I'm not.
Just be honest.
I'm not a fan of a lot of the stuff that he did outside of the 90s, 80s and 90s. And that's okay. But because to me, he made this sort of perfectly awesome, iconic film, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 is like a nice icing on the cake. And I think it's evident of his signature. He really, again, playing on these characters that are just sort of this crazy family dynamic, and how it escalates, it's like if you feel like the last 20 minutes of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is intense, it's like the last 30 minutes of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is like, it's almost too much to take. It's just so much. Like, it's
what's happening?
Yeah.
I think the reason
and it's like, how big is their underground facility?
Yeah. What is that? Who made that? First of all,
it's insane.
I think the reason that you care so much, or you're interested in what happens in the sequel, because I think the first movie did such a good job of setting up these characters for you to be genuinely interested in who they were. So I think watching what happens to them just comes naturally.
Again, being honest here, Chainsaw 2 was more of my growing up than the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was one that was on cable, and it was just something that I think was just more accessible to me for some reason. So that I actually saw Part 2 before I saw the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So those are our picks of the weeks. Those are
picks of the week.
Those are our picks of the week.
Or picks of the 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Just picks of the week.
Just pick a movie.
Pick a movie. Anyway.
Well, thank you for giving me another movie to want to check out.
Yeah, thank you for not making me. I wanted to watch it.
I remember you didn't want to, and I was like, if you don't watch this movie, you can't show up to the next podcast.
I loved it.
Yeah.
Really.
So those are our picks of the week. My Boyfriend's Back and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. I haven't seen My Boyfriend's Back, so I'll be checking that out soon.
Let me know when you do.
I'm just, the fact that Philip Seymour Hoffman is in it, that really gets me. I like Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah.
I know he probably has a tiny role in it, but
he does.
I like seeing these roles where actors, especially ones that have actors that move on to these like very serious, like you think of them as like as serious an actor as you can think of, like Philip Seymour Hoffman, like starting off in like a very kind of fun, goofy.
Yeah. In this, he's like a high school bully.
Yeah.
Back off, dead boy. Yeah, exactly. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, it is such a special ride that it is completely different from the first, but I think very much worth a viewing. And if anything, if you like dark humor, this one's littered with it.
Yeah. So let's go to our Murray moment, and you know what? Let's just get right into it.
Chicks dig me because I rarely wear underwear, and when I do, it's usually something unusual.
I think I need a root canal. I'm sure I need a long, slow root canal.
You gonna come and shake my monkey tree again?
Oh, what does that old queen know? She didn't even show.
Hey, this is so scrumptious. Is this hand shut?
The flowing robes, the grace, all striking.
That was fun.
All right, so 1974 was when John Belushi was the producer for the National Lampoon's radio show. This predated the Saturday Night Live as we know it today. He recruited Billy for the cast. The radio show, as some of you might know, was a start for so many folks who went on to do SNL later on. It was also right around the time that Billy met soon-to-be legend who left us too soon, comedian Gilda Radner. There are countless stories that could be told about these two, and I'm sure I'll talk about it in future podcasts. From their days on SNL together, the parties, their relationship with each other, so many tales, so many laughs, but also a lot of heavy hearts. I read a little bit of Live from New York, an uncensored history of Saturday Night Live recently, and I found this passage from Billy himself, talking about the last time he saw Gilda Radner before she passed away, and for some reason it just felt like something important to share this time around. Here's Billy in his own words. I can't do an impression, but I'll try. So Gilda got married. She went away. None of us really saw her anymore. There was one good thing though that happened. Lorraine, which was Lorraine Newman of Saturday Night Live, Lorraine had a party one night. It was a great party at her house, and I ended up being the disc jockey. She only had 45s and not that many, and I really had to work the music end of it. There was this whole collection of the funniest people I'd ever known at this party. Somehow Sam Kinison sticks out in my mind. The whole Monty Python group was there. So many of us from the show, a lot of other funny people, and Gilda. Gilda showed up, and she'd already had cancer and gone into remission and then had it again, I guess. Anyway, she was really slim. We hadn't seen her in a long time, and then she started doing the whole I've gotta go thing. And then she was just gonna leave, and I was like, you're gonna go? It felt like at that moment, it was the last time like I would see her. She was really going to leave forever. So we started carrying her around in this way that could only be done with her. We carried her up and down the stairs, all throughout the house repeatedly for a long time until I was completely exhausted. And then Danny Aykroyd, did it for a while. then I did it again. We just kept carrying her, and we did it in teams. We kept carrying her around, like upside down in every which way, over your shoulder, under your arm, carrying her like a piece of luggage. And that went on for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, just carrying her around and saying, she's leaving. This could be it. Now come on. This could be the last time you could see her. Gilda's leaving. Remember how she's really sick. Hello. We worked all aspects from it. And it had just started with, she's leaving. I don't know if you've said goodbye to her. And we said goodbye to the same 10, 20 people, you know. And because these people were really funny, every person we'd drag her up to would do like 5 minutes with her, with Gilda upside down in some tortured position, which she absolutely loved. She was laughing so hard, we could have lost her right then and there. It was just one of the best parties I'd ever been to in my life. I'll always remember it. It was also the last time I saw her. Now, I know Justin and I spent the majority of this podcast talking about a fictional horror movie inspired by true events, but it is truly the tragedies of real life that stick with us. And there's so much of me that wishes I could have been a fly on the wall during those pre-SNL days, these extraordinary moments that maybe seemed like nothing at the time, but looking back and remembering the last time you saw Gilda Radner alive, this woman you respected and loved and had a bond with like no other, it's totally gutting, but it's also really beautiful and a pretty fitting memory, actually. So, 1974, you were the beginning of so much for our guy, Billy Murray. And I know Justin and I both greatly appreciate Billy Murray and Gilda Radner and probably what they created together.
Oh, thanks for that. That was a touching tribute to Gilda Radner as well as Tobe Hooper.
Oh, I always loved that woman.
Yeah.
It's my childhood.
It's very visceral. MurrayMoment.
I wasn't expecting to come across like that moment, like necessarily, like him remembering the last time he saw her alive. And I don't know. I grew up loving Gilda Radner. So and those two obviously always had a very stark chemistry on Saturday Night Live together. So yeah, finding that, I was like, well, I guess this is it.
No, it's an incredible story. I mean, I think too, because I think comedians have a really great way of dealing with pain and tragedy through humor. You know, I mean, I think a lot of times it goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't know. Like that was very visual. Like I could,
it was like an actual like thing. Yeah. And like even previously, like with another Murray moment with Nothing Lasts Forever, like talking about like how everyone was so like supremely affected by the passing of John Belushi and like how that came out in like certain ways. It was just, I mean, it is just life. And like, that's what happens. But in these instances, it just seems so much bigger just because of like the impact of the people that we're talking about. And, these people are creating this art and putting it out in the world, and then they're leaving like the trail of heartbreak behind them. Exactly. And like what comes out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some of the best art has come out of tragedy or heartache.
Totally.
You know? I think that's a place, you know, you try to make something beautiful out of something tragic.
Yeah, not just TV or film, music, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That was...
Of course.
I didn't know. I was wondering. I didn't know where the, you know, because I know we try to connect. You try to connect it to the movie, but I think it was a very fitting way.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, evidently, 1974. It was a formative year for a lot of different things. Whether it's the beginning of a relationship or the beginning of something special in someone's career, or the beginning of something that would be an incredible niche area of the horror genre.
Yeah. And that was very early Bill Murray moment.
It was.
It was, you know,
man, if you look up some,
just about anything.
If you look up some great, there are some great early 70s Bill Murray photos if ever you're curious. Just Google
I'm always
that.
Curious.
Google that.
Well, thanks again for your Murray moments. I would like to close out with one thing. And
I
this
got
is
a thing too. So
do you? Okay.
yeah, I got a thing.
Right. Well,
what's your thing?
First.
No.
All
What's
right.
your thing?
Stop pointing at me.
I'm Italian. What do you want?
So it's not so much something about the movie. There is a place that opened a few years ago called the Gas Station, and I believe it's in Bastrop, Texas. It's fairly close to Austin, but this guy, he was a huge Texas Chainsaw Massacre fan, found the gas station that they used in the movie, and he sort of had it moved to this place in Texas, and they kind of built a whole like area around it. Like they have cabins that you can stay the night in, and you can actually buy like a piece of the wood that was part of the gas station. They have Texas Chainsaw Massacre memorabilia. I think they've also had like multiple, like the hitchhiker from Texas Chainsaw Massacre has made multiple appearances, especially around October.
Maybe we should take a little Don't Push Pause field trip.
Take Don't Push Pause to Texas.
Yeah, Don't Push Pause dog family field trip.
But if that doesn't happen, I encourage anybody to. They have it's called the Gas Station. Their website's pretty minimal, but it looks like it's pretty cool. I don't know too much about it. I was following them on Instagram for a while, but it seems pretty cool. It seems like they're developing it. Yeah. They're trying to get more like kind of special guests come and get autographs and that kind of stuff. I'm into that kind of stuff. I think it's fun. You know, I think you can. It is totally fun. I don't know.
The beautiful thing about something like that is that you have this one thing that you can do, and like you can stay there. There are cabins, right?
Yeah, it's not just like a 20-minute deal, and they serve like barbecue, like it's kind of in the whole.
Of course they serve barbecue. Yeah. Great. And you can make your own tour probably around the whole thing, or like at least talk to people if you're that interested in Texas Chainsaw, like talking to someone else and being like, "Oh, you should go 20 miles over here and you're going to find this," and like that's going to be great.
Yeah, I think it's something fun. I and it's definitely like a labor of love. It's like this guy like truly like loves this movie, and like, he put a lot of time and dedication into opening this place. So I want to go at some point, but you, the listener, if you are in Texas or you're close to Texas,
seek it out.
Check it out. At least check out their Instagram or their website. It's called The Gas Station. And what was your closing thought on the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
One of my favorite things about this movie is so we know that we've got elements of cannibalism. We've got just straight up murder. As we learned in Texas Chainsaw 2, we have award-winning barbecue that's from humans. So what we actually learned from the first one is that there is this underlying like idea of, I don't know whether it was really promoted like in the making of it or whether it happened afterwards just as like an incidental thing, but like in the beginning of Texas Chainsaw, it's really set up that humans are kind of like the same as animals being slaughtered in a slaughterhouse. Like we see scenes of slaughterhouses, cattle in slaughterhouses. And then the rest of the movie are kind of humans being treated the same way in some way. It's not, like I said, like we talked about, it's not like the most like visual, like bloody or anything like that, but they're being treated in the same way as animals. So one could probably make the assumption that this movie could be maybe promoting vegetarianism, and it's also interesting to note that for at least I think a year or something, I think it was Tobe Hooper that like went vegetarian for quite some time after the movie was done. And I don't think that it is necessarily a stretch to assume this, because there is a lot of likening animals to people, and that they are one, and that like look at our treatment of this. And again, I don't think that Tobe Hooper set out to be like, I'm going to make a movie about vegetarianism. I think it was just like something that happened during it. But I think that me being a vegetarian, like I noticed this maybe like 3/4 of the way through the movie, that it was a stark resemblance between animals and people, and them being equal, and being like, what are we trying to say actually here? So I think that's something that's important to like think about when you're watching the movie.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid.
It's kind of like a fun thing. Maybe like not the first time you're watching the movie through, but maybe the second time, or if you feel like you can't make it through a second time, like just keep that in the back of your head, just as like a that there is a slight commentary on like humans and animals kind of being the same, and like maybe like our way of like processing meat, or it's kind of a lot of things all put together.
Yeah, and Texas is just so known for its like barbecue.
Yeah,
and, like,
exactly.
Where most of the cattle
Dude,
comes
I was
from
just talking about pulled chicken.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
some
Texas pulled chicken.
I mean, the last time I had pulled barbecue chicken, it was right outside Center, Texas, and it was really good.
That's where to get it.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. We hope you have enjoyed it. Before we close out, I just wanted to make a mention. If you're not already, you can follow us on Instagram, Don't Push Pause Podcast. We're on Facebook, Don't Push Pause Podcast. You can go to don'tpushpausepodcast.com if you want to look for updates. We try to post about future episodes, what's going on, what we're watching, and a bunch of other silly stuff.
Yeah. So stick with us. We try to make it as fun and entertaining as possible.
And we can't thank you enough if you've been with us this long, or even if you're just joining us for the first time. Thanks so much. I'm Justin Johnson.
And I'm Lindsay Reber. Thank you.
Thanks for listening.